Hi, I'm Miss Glow. Thank you for joining me at this summer's Rock Island Library art program, Imagine Your Story, Dragon Tales. During the 5 classes that I'll be seeing you in, we'll be looking at dragon tales in art. Here's the word. In books and in art, we will create some dragon tales of our own. And there are many kinds of dragons throughout the world. I didn't know there were so many kinds, but I found this great map in a book that I have, and it shows locations of dragons all over the world. So we're going to learn about some of them and create some of them. First, I want you to take a look at the art materials that you got in your packet. You've got different kinds of paper. I didn't want to confuse you, but some of the papers have a small D up in the corner. Miss Glow did not put D on the paper that she has, but it's a thinner paper. It just has D on it because it's better if you don't add any water to it. You can, it'll curl up a little bit, but I've got this kind of paper in there for you, a sheet for each class, so that you can actually physically draw on it, sketch, maybe do some practice things. Then you have a heavier white paper that has a W on it, W for water. That's one that you can use to add a little bit of water to. I've used this as the back of something, but it's slightly heavier. So look for the D and look for the W. Every class you have a sheet of D paper. Every class except the first one, there's a W page. The first one is something a little bit different, and I'll show you that in just a minute. There's also a sheet of black paper, which is kind of interesting. We're so used to drawing on white paper. Sometimes it's nice to use a color. A black background is very dramatic, and it's going to affect the colors a little bit differently. We're not using that today, and I will talk a little bit more about it next time when we have the class where we need to use that. One of the sheets has a large egg shape on it. And I don't have one here with me, but you'll recognize it. It has a large egg on it. That's for class number 1, and you'll understand why in just a minute here. There are 5 extra sheets of very thin paper. That's basically copier paper. Everybody likes to have paper to draw on, right? So we've provided that. You can draw anything you want to on it. You can practice. You could even use a little bit of the color and put some water on it, but use it for practice. It's way too thin to use for a finished piece. Now, you have an instruction sheet. It's a 2-sided thing. The first side will tell you what you need for every class. It says at the top, Imagine Your Story, Dragon Tales, Rock Island Library Summer Art Program 2020. And the packet that you have, let me throw out a thank you to the IH Mississippi Valley Credit Union, who provided these groovy folders that you have for, I'm going to call them portfolios, but they provided those to us. That was really nice. I should thank the Rock Island Library, by the way. I'm always kind of behind here, but I want to thank them for doing this program for the summer. It's a great program. It gives all of you a chance to make some art. Also, the Rock Island Art Guild bought the art supplies for this year. So thank you, thank you. Back to the instruction sheet. It says supplies are provided for each of the 5 classes. This tells you what to do about the D and the W paper. Class number 1 today is dragon eggs, and you'll need the illustration page. In here are 5 different sheets. It says at the bottom, the class that it's for. This is today's project, the dragon egg sheet. You also will need a sheet of that D paper if you want to do a little practice sketching, and you'll need that egg sheet for that. At the bottom, if you're interested, and I hope you are because, hey, this is the library and there are books, and books are great to have. There's nothing else like it. There's a lot of the books listed that I'm using. It may or may not be all of them. I'm always finding stuff. I may have added a little something extra to it. But if you're interested, you can look up some of these books. I hope the library has them. You can't expect them to have everything. You can go to the reference desk and request that a book be gotten from another library, possibly. There are ways that you can find out if you can get the book, if you really are interested in it. So I've listed those for your enjoyment. On the back is a little something extra. I thought it's fun for artists to talk about their artwork. So there are some sheets of lined paper in your portfolio. That is for writing. Oh, don't go, I don't want to write anything. You might realize as you're doing the projects that you really want to express yourself in writing as well as in the art that you're making. So you can come up with some ideas for this. If you need some help, you might want your parents to help you with this. I know a lot of parents do not want you using the internet, and I understand moms and dads and whoever's in charge there. So there is a link to a family focused blog, and it gives you some ideas for how to help your children write a short story if they choose to do so. This isn't school, this is for your enjoyment, but hey, I'd love to be able to see both your artwork and your written work. And if you're okay with it, Mom and Dad, at the bottom I've put that I have an email just for you. I'm not going to mention it on this. You can read it on here because this is just for the kids that are in the program. You could scan their artwork, their stories, and send them to me. I'll be ending that email once the program ends. Just there's no reason to have it up there any longer. So with your permission, moms and dads, I'd like to post art and stories on a Facebook page that I will create for this. I'll let you know if that actually happens. It depends on if anybody sends me anything. But it would be dedicated to the artwork and the stories if your kids write stories. I'm only going to post a first name and the age. Please don't send me any pictures of children. I don't want recognizable faces. I'm very much wanting to have internet safety for everybody. But I'd love to just have a first name. Maybe you can photograph the back of their head and lean over their shoulder and get a nice photo of them working where you only see the artwork in their hands. Something like that. Just please no faces. So I leave it up to you if you decide to do that option. So that takes care of what is in your art portfolio. What is in your Ziploc bag is a set of Crayola-based watercolor pencils. I like these. I've been having a lot of fun playing around with them. You are also going to have a sharpener. And I want to point out there is a better way to sharpen pencils that will make your pencils last a little longer. When you do that, I shouldn't have sharpened this one last night, but it still needs a little work. When you put the pencil in the sharpener, don't turn the pencil. Don't do that. Turn the sharpener. It makes your pencil last longer. There's less apt to be breakage. So turn this, not this. That's the best way to sharpen it. So you've got 12 of those. You also have a pink eraser in there. You're going to need your own drawing pencil. Basically, that's about all that you need for art supplies. And if you wish, some of you may have crayons at home or markers or anything else. Feel free to add those as well, because for all the projects we're going to be using these color pencils. They can be used dry or they can be used wet, and I will show you what I mean by that when I do some of the demonstrations. So that's what you should have in there. I think I've covered everything. Some of you got a very stiff piece of cardboard. Good for you. That you could use it for a drawing board. I think I put one in every one. If I didn't, flip over a tablet back or find a hard book or a magazine or something that you can use for a drawing surface. Ask permission if you're using a book. But you can use anything that you need to for something like that while you're watching this video. And the fun thing about this video is we never have enough time in art class. Some of you have taken my classes before. We always run out of time. Well, hey, at least you can watch this. When I set up that Facebook page, I'll be setting up pictures of what I'm showing you on this. I don't know how long you'll be able to see this video online, but you can refer back to it. Maybe you don't feel like completing the piece that day. Maybe you want to come back to it. Please come back to it. Please finish. And you have some time to kind of think about it, because artists sometimes like to spend a lot of time thinking about what they're doing before they start, getting some ideas, what they're doing while they're working. They even think about afterwards thinking, oh, what have I done? Or I could do better. Maybe I can work on this later. But it's up to you how you like to work as an artist, because I consider all of you watching this artists, okay? So that takes care of the supplies that you're doing. Good thing I have some cards here, because I tend to get lost in my own thoughts sometimes. So we talked about what's in the art supplies. Oh, I want to show you just one quick thing with one of the pencils. I have some water here, and in your packet you will also have a paintbrush. Very important, I forgot to mention that. You do have to have your own, I forgot the water, Miss Sue. I didn't think I needed it. I'll give that to you, thank you. Thought I was going to do this later, but I just realized I wanted to show you something about one of these pencils. So I'm going to take out any one of the pencils. I guess I'll use black because it's a good contrast. Grab a sheet of something here. Thank you. I didn't really need too much, so that's great. When I said you could use these pencils wet or dry, I'm just going to use the edge of this and draw. Hang on a second here. I'll use the back of my book. I'll be very, very careful with it, however. Sometimes when I'm shading with these, I like to use what I call the little kid grip. You know, when you write, you hold your pencil like this. That way you can do small areas. I like the underhand or the little kid grip because I can move with my elbow and I can shade more areas and I can use the side of my pencil. So just a little patch of black to show you. There we go. Hang on a second here. So back to this. I've colored a small patch with black. Then I'm using my paintbrush and a little bit of water. You don't need much water with these. A little dab will do ya. Who said that, Fred Flintstone? When I add just a little water to it, it turns these things into paint. You can see that. It dissolves them in some way. Now, you can let it dry. You can go back in and draw something on it while it's dry, and I'll show you some of those things when we're doing the actual project. But I did want to mention when I said they can be used wet or dry, they can either be just colored and left like this where you see some texture, or if you like a more painterly approach, just a little bit of water. See what it did? It seems to almost darken it and makes it very, very smooth. So that's an overview of what your supplies are that you have to work with for this. If you get too much water, one other thing I want to mention, if you feel like you have too much water and you have some, I like to buy the cheap Kleenex or paper towel, anything like that, you always dab, you never rub. It makes these things look kind of funny and bumpy. It can also rub a hole right through your paper. So if you're not into that kind of look, dab but don't rub. So we've got our art supplies. We don't have to question what we're going to be using. The next question you have to ask yourself, artist, is, well, what are my ideas? Well, if you're starting from scratch, you might say that can be kind of difficult to come up with some ideas. But this is a dragon class, so everything is going to be focused on something to do with dragons. Sometimes if my brain isn't working, I go to my bookshelf because it's handy, or I come down to the library. I have to put my shoes on so I can do that, but I come down to the library with my library card and I look for a book that's going to help me come up with some ideas. Books are very helpful. You can find them here at the library. You're lucky to be able to check them out and just borrow them and bring them back and check out something else that might help. I'm going to show you a few this time. In fact, each time we have one of these classes, I have a few books to show you that relate to what we're doing. Dragon books. I don't know if you've ever seen this one before. I wasn't familiar with it, but a famous artist, Georgia O'Keeffe, when she passed away, they found that she had this book in her set of books that she had, or a bookshelf. I'd never heard of it before, so I had to buy it because I'm a big Georgia O'Keeffe fan. It was published in 1929. You may have heard of the author and illustrator. Remember, the author writes the book, illustrators do the pictures. And I hope I'm saying Wanda's last name right, Wanda Gag, which is an unusual name, but she wrote the book and she also did the illustrations. She is a printmaker, so she created prints for the illustrations. And this book is a silly book. It's black and white illustrations. It's about this funny thing who calls himself an aminal. And he has an unusual taste for something that he likes to eat. And if you want to know more about that, you're going to have to ask the library if they can get this book for you. So hope I'm not going to give the reference librarian too much work this year. Another book that's a little more recent, but way before your time, is Herald and the Purple Crayon. And Herald's author and illustrator, same person, Crockett Johnson, has his character Herald create an imaginary world using only a piece of paper and a purple crayon. So if you don't have a lot of art supplies, you can rely on a pencil and paper or just whatever you have. So Crockett Johnson did put into one of his stories a purple dragon. Sorry, Pixel, this is my friend Pixel. I don't think you can see him right now, but sometimes he gets in the way a little bit. But here is the dragon that Crockett Johnson put in this book. And it's an easier one to draw. I know that some of you out there are a little bit younger, and so some of the pictures, don't be intimidated by them. That means don't let them make you think you can't do this. You can draw at whatever level you're comfortable with. You can use your own style. So it's entirely up to you. I try to use examples that would be a little bit of both. The third book that I have to show you today, and Miss Glow, I am a real fan of pop-up books. I just love pop-up books. Unfortunately, you're not going to find too many of these at the library because they're a little bit more delicate because they're paper, and it would be a lot of hard use to have these at the library. If you want to see more of this book, you can go to YouTube and you will find Dragon World, and there's a person turning a page to show you all of the different pages in this. So I'm going to use just a couple things from it today. That map that I showed you is from this book. And the writer of this book believes that dragons really existed. Now, I'm on the fence with that. I think early people might have found dinosaur bones and skeletons. In fact, I found articles about that. They might have interpreted it as a dragon, and also they didn't know as much about science back then. Or maybe we just want to think that dragons did exist or do exist. It's going to be entirely up to you. I wouldn't worry about it either way. Just have fun with it. The page that I want to focus on today shows a dragon egg. It's a blue dragon egg with a lot of texture. And this is going to lead into the project we're going to be doing today. So you need the sheet of D paper, you need the thing with the manila colored egg on it, and you need the instruction sheet. Okay? That's what you're going to need. I'm going to give you a minute here to go ahead and get things lined up, and then we'll start out. Okay, we're almost ready to start the project. There's just a couple of things I want to tell you about before I start drawing and showing you something here. I just was wondering if any of you have ever heard the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? What if I changed the question to, which came first, the dragon or the dragon egg? I don't know the answer. Maybe one of you do. What I do know is that we're going to start with the dragon egg for the first project in this class. So I hope you have your supplies ready. A couple of other things I wanted to show you. Something else that I found in a book that I like a lot, and it's from, I hope you can see it because I can't see myself anymore, but it's a picture from a Harry Potter book. It's an egg chart from the Dragon Breeding for Pleasure and Profit. I have to admit, I've never read those books. I started once, I just didn't read them. But the illustrator is Jim Kay, and he gives a lot of interesting shapes and colors. There's a Hungarian horntail, I think it is, and down here is a Romanian longhorn egg. So he has a great imagination. There's a lot of color, a lot of shape. And eggs are one thing that are kind of fun to draw. That's something you might practice doing on that D paper. Again, I would hold the pencil underhand like I showed you. And it's kind of a hard shape when you're first drawing it, but if you imagine you're drawing it in the air, I always say it's like air guitar, only it's air drawing. Do that shape and then land it on your paper and practice, practice, practice. I had a grown-up older man in a drawing class over at the Figge Art Museum once, and he just couldn't draw oval shapes. And I said, Jim, go home and practice these. And he brought back a page of about 30 ovals. And he said, you know, it really looks better. And I said, it's like playing musical instruments or playing basketball. The more hoops you shoot, possibly your game gets better. Same thing with drawing. So you do have to do some practice. Sometimes it doesn't come out perfect. There is no such thing, but you need to just do a lot of practice and don't be too hard on yourself. And eventually, it's going to come out to look a little bit better. So that was one of the things that I wanted to show you that was in a book that related to the project that we're going to be doing. Now back to Dragon World and that page. This is supposed to be a full-size Western dragon egg. First time I've ever seen it. I'm going to leave that to your judgment. I just happen to have an egg in my pocket. Doesn't everybody? There's the size difference between a chicken egg and the one in this book. So you can kind of get an idea of the size difference in that. I like to be able to show you art pieces that relate to what we're doing because I'm an art teacher and I think it's important for you to see some things that also help you get inspiration. I found by chance this picture of a screensaver. It doesn't say who did it. I wish I knew because I like to give the artist credit for it. But you can see it's a mama dragon who's really holding on tightly to that dragon egg. And it inspired me for the piece that I was working on. So There's that screensaver. The dragon egg in the book here, I've only shown you the outside. On the inside, when you open it up, it is a pop-up of a Western hatchling. I love pop-ups because they're so three-dimensional. You know, when you're drawing on paper, that's called 2D or two-dimensional. It has height and it has width. 3D has height, width, and thickness. And somebody called a paper engineer had to figure out how the heck to do this. Now, the one that you're doing is not nearly as complicated. If you open up yours, you have to be careful when you close these books to make sure you don't crunch them. But the one that you have is a much simpler pop-up. I'm not going to open mine up yet because I don't have a blank one with me, but you do. The one that you have, the egg on the page is in the foreground. That means it's taking up most of the space. And maybe it would help if I started doing a little sketching here. See how well I can draw an egg, okay? I think that works. Not too shabby, maybe? Okay. So it's in the foreground, and the paper, there isn't a whole lot of paper around it. So this is in the foreground, the front. And the background, there's not much of it, but it's still part of the picture surface, this part. So figure out something to do with it. If you want to fill it in a solid color, it's up to you. If you want grass growing under your dragon egg, you can do that. That's maybe the easier way out. You could put the sunshine or clouds up here in the sky. On mine, and I guess I will take mine out now, I was inspired by that mom holding that dragon egg. So I imagine how much bigger she is than the egg itself. You can see that here. Look how much bigger she is than that egg. I thought, okay, what if in my picture it's representing that she's holding that? I have to imagine that the dragon is up here, the rest of her, but I at least can see part of her scales here. And so I started, well, I didn't start with the color right away. I had the idea that I wanted to put that in here. So I started drawing dragon scales, and I even found a picture on the internet to see what they looked like. You could do this if you wanted to. You could do something much simpler. You can see this. There's a little bit of a glare here. But I started doing ones that are kind of shaped like this. So I started drawing these in. But before I did that, I'm jumping ahead here, I used my watercolor pencils. Down here at the bottom you can see. I used a couple shades of green here. I think I even threw in some of the blue that you have in your packet. Let me pull those out so you can see exactly the pencils that I used. I used what's called sky blue. I used the one that's called yellow-green. And I used the ones, oh, I'm gonna have to sharpen this one. I used the green one. I have to admit, I have another set of pencils too that have a few more other colors in it, so I may have just used some of mine as well. But this is what you could use if you want that kind of a look. If your dragon is green, who says it has to be green? It could be something else. So when I did this, I held these underhand just like I was showing you, and I started coloring in just patches randomly. I have to sharpen that one. Patches randomly with these colors. When I had that all colored, then I used my brush. It's going to reactivate a little bit. But I started painting over this to make it look like paint. I just wanted it to look painterly. The egg, I didn't add water because I was so pleased with the way this looked like this, just using them dry. And I used brown, I used green, I used some yellow. There's kind of I guess I used a soft orange. And I just kept putting colors in there and it built up kind of a sheen. But I didn't want to add water because you don't have to add water all the time with this. So I didn't use water on this. If you want to, you can. I used water on this background part. If you want to, you can, or you don't have to. Then I started drawing in the scales, and I used violet for the scales. And I started drawing all of those in. And I haven't done all of them because I just haven't done all of them. But I started drawing in the lines, and then I wanted them to have some dimension. Dimension is, again, kind of like 3D. Makes them look a little more realistic. So I put in little patches of violet in places. I used, I think, the yellow, kind of a bronzy color in here. And I did all of this after this was dry. Very important. If you add water to it and you're going to put dry pencil on top, let it dry. You might want to come back to it and give it a chance to dry out, and then draw in, and then add some of these colors. And you can just keep adding more and more if you want it to be darker. Sometimes it takes a little while for these to build up with color. I have some professional artist ones that I like to use, but they're a lot more expensive. They fill in a little bit better, but the Crayolas will do a good job for you. You just might have to add a little bit more to it. So, also on yours, you've got a little round oval shape to keep your pop-up closed. Now, I had one under here as well. However, I thought, I found a scrap of something. I think it was from junk mail that came in the mail, and maybe the back of an envelope. I decided to cut the tip of a dragon tail out of that, colored it, and glued it over that little button. I think I trimmed the edge of the button off so it wouldn't show. I wanted to get a little bit more fancy schmancy with my closure. Then I decided, well, if it's got something over here, maybe I want to add something over here. So I took the rest of that envelope. I drew in some claws, like you see with Mama Dragon here holding on to her egg. I drew in part of her hand, her paw. I don't know, what, a dragon paw, is it? And I glued that up here. You don't have to. You don't have to, but for me, it was more fun to add that to it. So I put that on here for that. And again, the egg, just little patches of color here and there. Okay? But you can do that the way that you want to. You don't have to add scales. You could do the sky. Use your imagination. Or you could add a solid color that's a good contrast with this egg. So it's entirely up to you. Okay, on the inside now, I think we're ready for that. Now, I showed you that dragon hatchling that's in the book. Your pop-up is not quite the same. For one thing, it was much more complicated. Each one would have to be hand-cut, and it might involve a bit more drawing. I don't use these a lot. What happens if I add water? Anything? Not much. Okay, on the inside of your dragon egg, we're going to assume that there's an embryo. An embryo is a baby dragon that is developing. I don't know what they look like, but I know they're a reptile based on the books that I read, that dragons are reptiles. So on your illustration sheet, you've got some ideas that here's an alligator embryo, a lizard embryo. This is a gecko. I'm not sure that that's a real photo. That could be the gecko on that commercial. I don't know. Here's a close-up of Mama Dragon's claws and paws. This is just a hatchling dragon here. They're all ideas that maybe you want to use on that drawing paper if you want to do practice sketches. And I love this one. I love this one that's hatching out. I think it would be fun to make a paper mache egg and paint it so that you can see the eye coming through. What I was reading about dragons hatching is they have a special little tooth that they develop while they're an embryo, while they're just developing. And then they use that little tooth to start pecking from the inside out to get out. And then that tooth falls off, kind of like our teeth fall out when we're kids. So that's some ideas to help you draw. I used the alligator one. I want to show you a close-up of it. A color one, I should say. There's all the different colors you would see inside of an actual alligator egg. Yes, there's a lot of red because it's a living thing, and there's blood, and there are veins, and all the stuff that that little alligator embryo needs to nourish itself. It's very interesting to look up animal embryos and see what they look like before they hatch. So I used that idea to begin to draw mine into my egg. There's what it looks like when it's opened up. I just kind of invented it based upon what I saw in those pictures. Again, I drew it. Let me get that shape, and maybe I can give you an idea how I went about doing that. You've got a shape kind of like this. And because there's so much more egg around it, and it had to be that way, because if I gave you, I try to cut a lot of pop-ups, but if I gave you something bigger than this and it was closed, it would stick out. And I didn't want it to stick out. So I made this area as large as I could for you. You'd have to take some paper, fold it in half, and experiment yourself, and you'd kind of get an idea of what I mean by it. So this area that you've got here, this is where the fold is. So I just started out by thinking I want this to fill in with as much of a dragon as I can. And I brought a tail around here. The head, because I don't know what they look like. I made the eye extra big because with this embryo, as it's developing, that eye is pretty big there. So I did that. Drew kind of a foot here. I knew he would be scrunched together, so he would have kind of a big belly in here, because everybody's eating a lot more during this pandemic thing, and I think people's tummies are getting bigger all the time. I know mine is. And so when I'm sitting watching television, I think, oh boy, I need to hold my breath or start doing exercising. But when you scrunch in, especially if you were inside of an egg, everything would be kind of scrunched together, and your stomach would look even bigger than it might look when you're standing up. So I'm going to look at my drawing here to see what it is that I did. I drew the short legs up here. I drew another leg down here that would be sticking out, and another paw or leg over in here. I was thinking this might be a Western dragon. So I started filling in what might kind of look like a wing here. You know, I've got all this stuff that's crunched in there. There's not a whole lot of room. I also gave this little dragon some points up in here. This has to be in this whole thing, so we'll pretend I've got a little more space here. I gave him that tooth. So just think about how you could fill in that whole space. That whole space. If you wrap the tail around, think about the head being up in here. When artists are having trouble drawing, or when you're learning to draw, you think about shape. So if you think about, kind of going backwards here, but you think about a shape of the head shape, you think about an oval where the body would be, you think about where the legs would be, and then you start refining it. And that's why you've got that great pink eraser. I love erasers. I love the good ones. This one looks entirely different, but you can kind of get an idea here of how I started out with those shapes, an oval up here, an oval over here, the legs over here. So think about shape. If you think it's really hard to do, and it can be tricky at first, try to simplify it. Think about shapes. The legs I just thought would be, kind of bent, and some cartoony-like toes. My drawing is getting worse all the time, isn't it? But you can kind of get an idea when I'm working kind of fast here what I'm trying to show you. So I hope this helps, giving you these ideas. Now, I haven't finished coloring mine in, obviously. I want to have more reds over in here, and I actually used red on this, but background colors of paper affect the colors. So when you add red and yellow, you get anyone? You get orange. You get orange. So it's looking a little bit more orange. I'm going to have to experiment and see if it's going to look a little more red as I layer on the colors when I finish this. I probably should try to finish this. Well, it can't be for the next class, but the next time I film it, if I can finish it. And actually, I hope to see yours, if it's okay with your parents to go ahead and send me those ideas that you've done, or the pieces that you've done. So let's move ahead and think about what you're thinking about when you're creating your art. What was I thinking about when I was creating my art? Well, I was thinking about the mother dragon holding the egg. I was thinking about what kind of design I wanted to use with that. I was having fun with the colored pencils. But I would also like to know what you're thinking about when you made your art. Do you want to describe it? Just say it's a big egg, the colors are, I picked the colors because, tell me why you use those colors. Or create a story. You could create a story. For example, if I were imagining things, there we go. If I were imagining things, my story might begin like this. One day, I heard a knock at the door. I looked out the window, but there was nobody there. But when I looked down at the porch, I saw that something had been delivered. It was a large box, the color of burnt sienna. It had copper corners, brass nails, and shiny gold handles. Now, I looked around to see if anybody was there, but they weren't. I didn't know where it came from. Didn't have any postage stamps on it. The marking said Sarkani. I wasn't sure what that meant. It might be Hungarian. I don't know. I don't know that language. But I thought, what on earth is in this box? Well, I decided to open it up. On the inside was a kind of an unusual bronze color fabric, but it felt like there might be something in there. So I lifted the fabric, and inside was a shiny, speckled dragon egg. Oh, we're out of time. But I'm sure there'll be more to this story. I just haven't written it yet. I hope this inspires you to create some artwork for this week, to practice some of those eggs and some of those other things. Write a story or write a description. Ask Mom and Dad if they'll send it in an email to me so that it can be on a Facebook page. So until I see you again, happy dragon, happy dragon, happy dragon. Tails. Lost my other sign, but there's 2 ways to spell it. I'll see you next time. Thanks. Okay.